The technique of drawing the effect of detail is that we don't seek to capture exactly, precisely, super accurately what we see, but we try and get a sense of the overall visual effect that this particular detail has on our scene, and we seek to capture something of the effect of that without having to draw all the detail, which often, besides being impossible, actually would overwhelm our drawing anyway with lines. And I often talk about this technique with foliage, and you might have seen me demonstrate it on my foliage and tree playlist. But it's very well suited for all things architectural, really for any overwhelming detail. But I thought this cottage that's in a street in Hobart in Tasmania was a great example, because there are a number of places where the sort of detail that can be usefully drawn by creating marks that convey, that capture the effect of the detail, can be used. And particularly in, say, the corrugated iron on the roof, with the bricks, with the wrought iron lacework on the veranda, with the plants that we have in the foreground, the garden in front particularly, but also the trees in the back, and also the stone wall, the low stone wall in front. Now, all of these are subjects that, from many drawings I've seen, really can cause difficulties, cause problems. But before, of course, we can draw the effect of these details, we need to capture the overall look, the overall shape, the overall lines of the cottage. And so you can see I started, as I usually do, if possible centrally, drawing just a couple of details that I can block out accurately, a couple of relatively simple shapes. And you'll notice that you may not notice because this is sped up 3 times. So this drawing with a 0.1mm Copic multi-liner pen took me 45 minutes to do in real time. I'd actually selected it as a 10-minute real-time drawing, and I looked at it and I thought, there is so much detail here. I'm sick of having to, not sick, but I'm getting a bit tired of having to draw everything so quickly, that it would be nice to slow down with this and actually to use it to showcase capturing the effect of detail, when I realized just how much detail was in this scene. It's not that we couldn't draw it quickly. I could have probably drawn this in easily in 20 minutes, but the look would have been much more gestural, much more loose. So I thought this scene needed a little bit more time. Notice how I'm aligning those 2 top points of the roof in my reference first with what comes below them, which is particularly the columns of the veranda. And then I'm aligning my points on my drawing above where the columns of the veranda are on my drawing. I do the same for these arch-topped dormer windows in the roof. Trying very hard to make sure I keep the proportions of the size of these windows to the roof accurate. It's very easy with this sort of detail to draw it just slightly larger in each little part of it, but then overall it becomes noticeably larger, and visually it has a greater impact in our drawing than it has in life. So now I have these 2 chimneys, and again I'm aligning the outer edge of them with the columns of the veranda beneath, and so that worked nicely, and they're just both slightly taller than the top pitch of the roof. And fortunately I noticed that there was a little bit of something different happening at the tops of the stairs. That meant the bottom of those 2 central pillars were a bit different. So you'll notice that I drew the effect of the wrought iron lacework above. So what I'm trying to say there with my marks is this is wrought iron lacework, without trying to precisely capture the pattern. But I want to have a sense that that's there, that if we've seen wrought iron lace, my marks, certainly where they are located, convey that meaning in a natural way. So now I've moved down to just blocking a bit of the line work for this lower wall and the garden between it and the house. And there's 2 or 3 levels of plants that we have to capture. So I'm not trying to draw the plants and all the stems and all the leaves, I'm looking overall at the effect, which really is lights and darks for these plants. And I'm trying to capture the lights and darks. So I'm not drawing plants, I'm drawing shadows. And this is often the way we draw by effect. We see the effect of the shadows, the shade, and sometimes simply the effect of the colours. Some colours are dark without necessarily being shaded or shadowed, and we can do hatching, we can do line work to reflect that. But now I'm thinking I need to get the rest of the veranda done, I think. So I locate where the windows are. Again, I'm using my columns because I'm confident that these veranda posts, rather more than columns, are accurately spaced, and therefore I can use them now to measure the windows. But I'm also aware that the windows need to look as though they're each centered on the doorway. So doing that is I tentatively just place a few dots, a few marks to tell me, I think one side of the window goes here and the other side goes there, and then I look back and visualize it within those two spots, and if I'm feeling confident, I lock it in. I block it in to lock it in. And you can see now that I'm wanting to do some hatch work for the shadows against the wall under the veranda, because that's a very important part of the overall effect of this cottage. It really makes the lacework stand out. It also highlights the veranda posts most clearly. And so I want it to be dark enough for that. Now, these posts are actually very thin. The white space between the two lines is particularly thin, and I took even more care than normal drawing them. And I tried to slow down and be careful doing the hatching as I came up close to them. It's interesting, I've got used to compromising accuracy and hatching a little bit with these 10-minute real-time drawings. And I had to remind myself, this isn't a quick one. You can go slow, Stephen, and take the time you need to start your lines in the right place and not have them start on the wrong side of a boundary line at either end. Although I do want these just to kind of blur into white at the lower end. They don't have a spot where they end precisely. So now I've got the railing. So again, I'm wanting to draw the effect of this railing, but I want the effect to feel different to the effect of the lacework above, because visually it is a different effect. We've got these kind of rounded shapes in between an upper and lower border of more shapes. So I'm defining those three broad areas, and now I'm trying to create the effect of each section. So I start with the center section because it's the main one. And again, I'm not trying to be detailed. I'm not lining these circles up and doing them precisely. Once I start doing that, then I've got to maintain that level of precision across the whole drawing. And that's very hard to do. And then you actually create the effect that it doesn't look right. So if I keep the whole thing loose and, if you like, approximate, then I can be consistent in that approximation across the whole of the iron railing. Does that make sense? So you can see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I realize this doesn't exactly replicate the pattern in the ironwork. But as I said, I'm trying to create the effect of the pattern and more marks. And I always think marks, I never think lines. Even when an architectural drawing has a lot of lines, lines are just some of the marks that I use. But I'm also aware of, as I'm doing this section, where there's parts of the garden coming up, interrupting the lines of the house, and trying to make sure I don't do straight lines quickly where in fact I have another object coming up over the top. Unless that object is completely blacked over, we're going to still read the line behind it, and that visually creates confusion because it makes it clear what's in front of what. And then we also start to create a sense of unreality of two dimensions. So we want it to be very clear what's in front of what by not overlapping objects when we draw in ink. So now I'm working on the space between the top of these circular or elliptical shapes, and then, well, I've already done it for underneath. And so what I'm hoping is that when we glance at this, we're going to realise, oh yes, that's a wrought iron railing and there's lacework above it as well. A lot of our house is done now. I decided now to do the corrugated iron. I ummed and ahed about leaving the roof bare because it does look nice and clean, which pretty much is how this roof does look in the reference, but I decided more for the sake of the demo rather than what I perhaps would have done otherwise. I would just start to capture the effect of the corrugated iron. The most important thing with corrugated iron, which is very common in Australian architecture, is that we get the angles correct. The sheeting's laid in a particular direction and the corrugations are straight, which means they're going to start to be affected by whatever is happening perspective-wise on the surface that they're on. Now, this is coming straight at us, but it does lean backwards, which means that the width compresses, shrinks as it moves further back, and that creates a splayed out effect. So directly in front of us, the lines are pretty much straight or almost straight, but as they move to the left and right, they angle increasingly to the left and right. And so it's important, firstly, that I check in the reference to see how much that is, and then I try and capture those. You'll see I've used little dots to just capture some of the shadows under some of the corrugations. Again, it's seeking to capture the effect, not draw the detail. And now I'm doing the effect of the brickwork, and I've got quite a few videos on this. The important thing was to keep it very light and to not let the bricks become large, because that then changes our perception of the scale. We have a sense of how large a house brick is, and so if suddenly we start drawing house brick effects on our buildings that are too large or too small, it becomes confusing. So scale is always important with some element of our marks when we draw the effect of detail. So now though, I'm moving definitely onto the garden. The house is pretty much done, but the house is going to be framed by these dark values on the left, and so I'm very keen to include them. And unfortunately, I make a slight mess up of that leftmost column and just do, I think, one line basically that went into it, but it had the effect of obscuring a bit of the top. So should have been a bit more careful. I think the fact that I felt like I'd started the home run maybe just took my attention away. But you can see me now with the columns in a couple of spaces. I'm taking care to define them. And look, if you're still here at this stage, please hit the like button for me. It really does help me. So if this video has been helpful enough for you to persevere to this point, please do that for me. And now working along the front and having to extend the garden more onto the other side as well. But I'm really looking at the values and drawing the darknesses and trying to create the edges, because silhouette edges are always important. We read detail, and silhouette edges are sometimes caused by the edge of the shape of the object, and sometimes they're caused by darkness behind the object that highlights the object in a way that wouldn't otherwise happen. And so that's what I'm trying to take advantage of, that second way with this garden, with its sort of parallel planes of plant going backwards towards the house. And now we have these steps. And the important thing to keep in mind is we want a nice low stone wall, but we also want a nice slope on the street. And it's surprisingly easy to want to make our street flat, level at this point, or sometimes just to exaggerate it too much. So if we'd done that at this stage, then the house would have looked not quite sitting in the right place, not quite sitting the same distance off the ground, which would have been a bit odd. I added just a little darkness there, a little plant that's behind the one in front, that's not in the reference, because I just wanted a little bit of dark there to push that column forward and just to speak to the larger, darker framing on the other side. But I have decided that I'm going to have more line, more ink work on the lower side, the left-hand side of the house, and on the right-hand side where the ground's going up, I'm going to, not too much, but in a subtle way, I hope, trail off my line work and my values with just less detail to create visually a slight imbalance, which I think is going to be helpful for the overall visual interest, because the house is very symmetrical. it's very balanced in itself. So I've wanted to make it just slightly less balanced. And so this really is the fine tuning. The one thing I do have to do though, that I haven't started, is the detail, capturing the effect of the detail of the stonework. So I do the same thing on the right-hand side that I've done on the left-hand side, except I'm careful to observe the right-hand side before I do it. It's again a real trick to fall into, or trap rather than trick to fall into, that we think, oh yeah, it'll be the same. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's significantly different. And sometimes it's significantly better for being different. So we don't want to miss the opportunity by being presumptuous. Giving time, investing time to careful observation is really important. If we chose a scene to draw, there's probably a lot about that scene that we do like, and we don't want to miss out all the interesting bits when we actually come to draw it. So light line work, I want this to show some texture and a sense of being a bit rough and a bit grubby, but I don't want it to be so black that it draws the eye away from the darker areas that we have, the value areas that are darker that we have already. And now I've just got the gutter, and I decided to do small vertical lines because although they were going to take a lot longer to do, not quite so long at 3 times the speed, I thought that it would work better. And of course you can watch the sped up sections at half time by using the cog icon, which will bring them back down to not much beyond the actual drawing speed. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this helpful. Drawing the effective detail, not the detail, is probably my signature technique and teaching, and I just think it's so incredibly effective. So why not give it a go? I have a playlist on this technique where you can see it used in lots of different subjects if you'd like to explore it more. But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, fast or long, make sure you have fun. I certainly did this time. I'll see you next time though. Bye.